The morning air in London carried an unusual tension that Tuesday in September. Agent Marcus Webb had been stationed at the American Embassy for nearly 18 months, and he prided himself on understanding the delicate balance of diplomatic relations. At 42 years old, with 17 years of FBI service under his belt, Marcus had handled everything from counterterrorism operations to high-profile protection details. Nothing in his extensive training, however, had prepared him for what would unfold over the next 72 hours. The embassy sat in Nine Elms, a modern fortress of glass and concrete that represented American interests on British soil. Marcus had arrived early that morning, earlier than usual, because intelligence reports had flagged potential security concerns. The reports were vague, speaking of increased chatter among extremist groups and possible threats against diplomatic targets. It was the kind of information that kept security personnel on edge but rarely materialized into actual incidents. Sarah Chen, the embassy's deputy chief of mission, had called an emergency briefing for 8 o'clock. Marcus entered the secure conference room to find a dozen faces already gathered around the polished oak table. Sarah stood at the head, her expression grave. She was a career diplomat who had served in some of the world's most challenging postings, and Marcus had learned to read her moods like a barometer of international tensions. "We have a situation developing," Sarah began without preamble. "British intelligence has intercepted communications suggesting a high-value target may attempt to seek asylum at our embassy within the next 24 hours. The identity of this individual is classified at the highest levels, but I can tell you that their arrival would create significant diplomatic complications." Marcus leaned forward, his mind already racing through security protocols. Asylum seekers weren't uncommon at embassies, but the level of secrecy surrounding this one suggested something far more complex. "Do we have any details about the threat level?" he asked. Sarah's pause spoke volumes. "The individual in question has connections to foreign intelligence services. If they make it to our doors, we'll be caught between our legal obligations and maintaining relations with the host country. The British government has made it clear, through unofficial channels, that they would prefer this person never reaches our embassy." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Marcus understood immediately that this wasn't just about protecting embassy grounds. This was about navigating a potential international incident that could strain the special relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom. Throughout the day, Marcus coordinated with his team to heighten security measures. Additional Marine guards were posted at all entrances, surveillance systems were checked and rechecked, and contingency plans were reviewed. The embassy functioned like a small city within the larger metropolis of London, and every component needed to work perfectly under potential stress. By evening, Marcus found himself reviewing camera feeds in the Security Operations Center. The banks of monitors displayed every angle of the embassy's perimeter. The street outside remained quiet, typical for a Tuesday evening in this part of London. A few pedestrians hurried past, heads down against a light drizzle that had begun to fall. Double-decker buses rumbled by at regular intervals, and black cabs occasionally stopped to pick up or drop off passengers. His radio crackled to life. "Agent Webb, we have movement on the north perimeter. Single individual approaching on foot, moving with purpose." Marcus switched his attention to the relevant monitors. A figure in a dark coat walked steadily toward the embassy's main entrance, head covered by a hood. The gait suggested someone trying to appear casual while moving quickly. "All stations. Maintain heightened awareness. Subject approaching main entrance." The figure reached the outer security checkpoint where a Marine guard stood post. From the camera feed, Marcus could see an exchange of words, though the audio wasn't clear at this distance. The Marine's body language shifted from routine alertness to active concern. He spoke into his radio while maintaining visual contact with the individual. "Sir, subject is requesting immediate entry and claiming political asylum." The Marine's voice came through clearly. "Says his name is Dmitry Volkov, and that he has information vital to American security interests." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. A Russian name, a direct asylum claim, and a promise of intelligence. This was exactly the scenario Sarah had warned them about. "Hold position. I'm coming to your location. No one enters or exits without my direct authorization." He grabbed his sidearm, checked the magazine out of habit, and headed for the main entrance. The embassy's protocols for asylum seekers were clear, but the political ramifications of this particular case meant everything needed to be handled with extreme precision. As he moved through the corridors, he contacted Sarah Chen to inform her of the development. The main entrance area was designed with security in mind. Bulletproof glass separated the exterior checkpoint from the embassy proper, and multiple layers of security doors created buffer zones that could be sealed independently. Marcus arrived to find the Marine Guard, Corporal Jackson, maintaining a professional distance from the individual outside. Through the glass, Marcus could now see the man clearly. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, with sharp features and eyes that darted nervously between the guard and the street behind him. His coat was expensive but showed signs of hard wear, and his shoes were muddy, suggesting he had been moving through less traveled areas. Marcus pressed the intercom button. "I'm Special Agent Marcus Webb, FBI. Please state your full name and the nature of your request." The man's English was good but heavily accented. "My name is Dmitry Volkov. I am former officer of Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, the SVR. I wish to defect to the United States, and I have information about operations targeting your country and your allies. Please, you must let me in. There are people looking for me, and if they find me before I can reach safety, the information I carry dies with me." Every instinct Marcus had developed over nearly 2 decades in law enforcement told him this was genuine. The fear in Volkov's eyes wasn't fabricated, and the tremor in his voice suggested someone who had made an irreversible decision and now faced the consequences. But genuine fear didn't mean the situation wasn't also a trap or a provocation. "Mr. Volkov, I need you to understand that asylum requests require extensive processing. I can't simply grant you entry without proper verification and authorization from Washington. What I can do is contact the appropriate departments and begin that process while ensuring your immediate safety." Volkov shook his head violently. "You don't understand. They know I'm here. The SVR, they have assets in London. I was followed to within 2 blocks of this location. If you don't let me in right now in the next few minutes, I will either be dead or disappeared. And the intelligence I carry about the operation planned for next month, the one targeting your embassy in Paris, that dies too." Marcus felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Embassy security was his responsibility, but so was evaluating threats to American interests abroad. If Volkov was telling the truth about intelligence regarding an operation against the Paris embassy, every second of delay potentially cost lives. He made a decision. "Corporal Jackson, prepare to receive one individual for security processing. Mr. Volkov, I'm going to allow you into the outer security vestibule for your immediate safety. However, you will be searched, you will be separated from any personal effects, and you will be held in a secure area while we verify your identity and claims. Do you understand and agree to these terms?" "Yes, yes, anything. Just please let me inside." Marcus nodded to Corporal Jackson, who activated the magnetic lock on the outer security door. The heavy glass door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. Volkov stepped through quickly, and the door sealed behind him with a solid thunk that seemed to release some of the tension from his shoulders. "Hands on the wall, feet apart," Corporal Jackson instructed, and Volkov complied immediately. The search was thorough and professional. A wallet, a mobile phone with a cracked screen, a small notebook with handwritten notes in Russian, and a thumb drive were removed and placed in a clear plastic bag. "The thumb drive," Volkov said urgently. "That contains preliminary files. Not everything, but enough to prove I am who I say I am. Please, examine it. You will see." Marcus took possession of the items. "Mr. Volkov, you're going to be escorted to a holding room where you'll remain under guard while we process your request and verify your information. You'll be provided with water and basic necessities. Do you have any medical conditions we should be aware of?" "No, I am healthy. But please, work quickly. Every moment I am here, I am putting you and your people at risk. The SVR does not give up easily when one of their own betrays them." 2 Marine guards escorted Volkov deeper into the embassy, toward the secure detention facilities used for exactly these kinds of situations. Marcus watched them disappear down the corridor before turning his attention to the items collected from their unexpected guest. The phone was locked, but the notebook was immediately interesting. Even without reading Russian fluently, Marcus could make out dates, names, and what appeared to be locations. The thumb drive would need to be examined by the embassy's technical team in an isolated system to prevent any potential malware from compromising their networks. He was heading toward the Technical Operations Center when his radio erupted with urgent traffic. All security personnel, we have movement outside the perimeter. Multiple vehicles approaching at high speed from the direction of Westminster. Marcus changed direction, heading back toward the Security Operations Center. When he arrived, the scene on the monitors made his blood run cold. 4 black SUVs with tinted windows had positioned themselves at strategic points around the embassy's perimeter. Men in dark suits were emerging, and while they weren't displaying weapons openly, their professional movements and coordination screamed law enforcement or intelligence operatives. "Get me a count and try to identify their affiliation," Marcus ordered the security team. One of the analysts, a young woman named Patricia Reeves, worked her keyboard rapidly. "Sir, we're running the vehicle registrations now. The way they're positioning suggests a containment formation. They're not storming the gates, but they're definitely establishing a perimeter." Sarah Chen arrived at the operations center, her face pale. "Marcus, I just received a call from the British Foreign Office. They know we have Dmitry Volkov inside the embassy. They're demanding we turn him over to British authorities for questioning regarding matters of national security." Marcus turned to face her. "Do we even know for certain that this guy is who he claims to be? And if he is, doesn't he have the right to apply for asylum?" "The British are claiming he's wanted in connection with espionage activities on UK soil," Sarah replied. "They're saying that by harboring him, we're interfering with an active British intelligence operation." The call was polite, but the underlying message was clear. They want him. They want him now. And they're prepared to make this a diplomatic incident if we refuse. On the monitors, the situation outside was evolving. More vehicles had arrived, and Marcus could now see individuals in what appeared to be tactical gear. These weren't regular police officers. The coordination and equipment suggested specialized units, possibly from the Metropolitan Police's SO-15 Counter-Terrorism Command, or even elements from the Security Service, MI5. "We need to contact Washington immediately," Marcus said. "This is above my pay grade. If the British government is seriously considering action against the embassy, we need guidance from State and from Langley." Patricia spoke up from her workstation. "Sir, I'm picking up radio traffic that's being encrypted, but the volume and patterns suggest significant coordination. Whatever they're planning, they're not just standing around." Marcus made another decision. Lockdown protocol. Seal all entrances except the primary access point. All non-essential personnel are to move to interior offices away from windows. Marine guard posts are to be reinforced, but I want it clear to everyone that we are not, under any circumstances, to take any action that could be construed as hostile. The embassy began its transformation into a fortress. Heavy security shutters descended over vulnerable windows. Additional Marine guards took up positions at critical choke points within the building. The ambassador, who had been at an evening function across the city, was being redirected to a secure location rather than returning to the embassy. In the holding room 3 floors below, Dmitry Volkov sat on a simple bench, his head in his hands. He had gambled everything on reaching American protection, and now he found himself at the center of an international standoff that could have consequences far beyond his individual fate. Marcus stood in the operations center, surrounded by glowing monitors showing the gathering forces outside, and wondered how a routine security day had spiraled into a potential crisis that could define his career and possibly alter diplomatic relations between 2 of the world's closest allies. The night was just beginning, and every decision from this point forward would carry enormous weight. The phone on Sarah Chen's desk rang with the distinctive tone of a secure line from Washington. She answered, listened intently for several minutes, and then hung up with a troubled expression. "Washington wants a full briefing on everything Volkov told us and everything we've collected from him. They also want to know exactly what the British have staged outside. They're convening an emergency meeting at State, but in the meantime, we're to maintain our position and protect Volkov as a potential asylum seeker with rights under international law." Marcus nodded, understanding the implications. The United States was choosing to stand on principle, at least for now, rather than immediately capitulate to British pressure. It was the right decision legally, but it meant the standoff would continue and possibly escalate. Outside, under the glow of London's streetlights and the embassy's security lighting, the two sides maintained their positions. Inside the embassy, staff members tried to continue their work while acutely aware that something unprecedented was unfolding around them. And in a secure room designed to hold individuals in exactly this kind of limbo, Dmitry Volkov waited to learn whether his desperate bid for freedom would succeed or whether the forces he had betrayed would find a way to reach him even here, on what was technically American soil. The standoff continued through the night, with neither side willing to blink first. Marcus had managed only 2 hours of sleep on a cot in his office, and now, as dawn broke over London, he stood once again in the Security Operations Center reviewing the situation. The British forces outside had not diminished. If anything, their presence had grown more organized. Barriers had been established, creating a controlled zone around the embassy's perimeter. And while they maintained a respectful distance from the actual embassy property line, the message was clear. No one was leaving with Dmitry Volkov without their knowledge and approval. The technical team had spent hours examining the thumb drive Volkov had provided, working in an isolated computer system with no network connections to prevent any potential compromise. What they found was both fascinating and deeply troubling. The drive contained partial intelligence reports detailing Russian operations across Western Europe, including surveillance photographs of diplomatic facilities, communications intercepts, and what appeared to be advanced planning for some kind of operation scheduled for October. Marcus reviewed the translated summaries that the embassy's Russian-speaking intelligence analyst had prepared. If this information was genuine, and all indications suggested it was, then Volkov represented a significant intelligence windfall. He also represented an enormous problem, because the British clearly had their own interests in either questioning him or preventing his defection. Sarah Chen had been on phone calls for most of the night, speaking with officials in Washington, coordinating with the CIA station chief, and attempting to maintain some channel of communication with the British Foreign Office. She looked exhausted, but maintained the professional composure that had served her throughout a distinguished diplomatic career. "Washington wants us to begin a formal debriefing of Volkov," she informed Marcus during a brief lull in the phone traffic. "They're sending a specialized team, but they won't arrive until late afternoon at the earliest. In the meantime, we're authorized to conduct preliminary interviews to assess the full scope of what he knows." Marcus considered the implications. If we start formally debriefing him, we're essentially committing to seeing this through. The British will view that as us choosing Volkov over maintaining the status quo with them. "Washington is aware of that," Sarah replied. "The calculation is that if Volkov's intelligence is as valuable as it appears, it's worth the temporary friction. The relationship with Britain is strong enough to weather this, or so the thinking goes. But Marcus, I want you to understand something. If this goes wrong, if Volkov turns out to be a plant, or if his information leads to a disaster, the people making these decisions in Washington will have their careers. We'll be the ones left holding the consequences." It was a stark assessment, but Marcus appreciated her honesty. He had been in law enforcement long enough to understand how institutional politics worked. Success had many fathers, but failure was an orphan that got left at the doorstep of field personnel. The interview room where they brought Volkov was designed to be both secure and reasonably comfortable. It wasn't an interrogation cell, but neither was it someone's office. Neutral territory for what would be a crucial conversation. Volkov looked worse for wear after a night in the holding facility. His hair was disheveled, and dark circles under his eyes suggested he had slept as poorly as Marcus. But his gaze was sharp and alert when Marcus and a CIA officer named Thomas Brennan entered the room. "Mr. Volkov, I'm Special Agent Webb, and this is Mr. Brennan from the Central Intelligence Agency," Marcus began, using the formal designation rather than spelling out CIA directly. "We've reviewed the preliminary materials you provided, and Washington has authorized us to begin a more comprehensive discussion about your situation and the information you claim to possess." Volkov leaned forward eagerly. "Then you understand that what I have is genuine. You see that I am not making false claims?" Brennan, a veteran intelligence officer with 20 years of experience running assets and conducting debriefings, took over. "What we see is that you've provided some interesting material, but we need to understand the full picture. Start from the beginning. What was your role in the SVR? How did you access this information? And most importantly, why are you defecting now? For the next 2 hours, Volkov talked. He described his recruitment into the SVR after completing his degree in international relations at Moscow State University. He detailed his training at the academy, his early assignments in economic intelligence, and his eventual transfer to a unit focused on operations in Western Europe. I was good at my job, Volkov said without pride, simply stating a fact. I believed in what we were doing, protecting Russia's interests, gathering intelligence on potential threats. But slowly, over years, I began to see that much of what we did was not defensive. It was aggressive, destabilizing. We were not protecting Russia from threats. We were creating threats to justify our own existence and budget. Marcus listened carefully, not just to the words, but to the delivery. Volkov spoke like someone who had spent considerable time thinking through his reasoning, wrestling with a decision that had cost him everything familiar. The turning point came 6 months ago, Volkov continued. I was assigned to support planning for an operation called Cascade. The details were compartmented, but my role involved identifying vulnerabilities in embassy security protocols across several European capitals. As I worked on this, I began to piece together what Cascade was actually designed to achieve. Brennan's expression remained neutral, but Marcus could sense his heightened interest. And what did you conclude Cascade was designed to achieve? Disruption, Volkov replied simply. Massive disruption to Western diplomatic operations through coordinated actions across multiple sites. The goal is not military victory but political chaos. Make Western governments doubt their ability to protect their own personnel. Create public incidents that dominate news cycles and force policy responses. Some elements involve cyber operations, but others... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Others involve direct action that could result in casualties. The room fell silent as the implications settled over everyone. Marcus had dealt with terrorism threats, with violent criminals, with every variety of human malice. But there was something particularly chilling about a state-sponsored operation designed specifically to target diplomatic personnel who believed themselves protected by international law. You mentioned the Paris embassy specifically when you first arrived, Marcus said. What's the threat there? Volkov nodded. Paris is the test case. The operation planned for Paris is designed to probe Western responses. If it succeeds without significant consequences, then similar operations will be executed at other locations. The planning is quite advanced. They have people watching the embassy, mapping the patterns, identifying vulnerabilities. Brennan pressed for specifics, and Volkov provided what he could. Names of SVR officers involved in the operation, timelines, methods of surveillance. It was valuable intelligence, the kind that could allow security services to disrupt the operation before it could be executed. But it was also the kind of intelligence that made Volkov an incredibly high-value target for the SVR to eliminate. The debriefing was interrupted when Marcus's radio crackled urgently. Agent Webb, you need to return to Operations Center immediately. We have a significant development outside. Marcus excused himself and hurried back to the Operations Center. What he saw on the monitors made his stomach drop. A convoy of vehicles had arrived, different from the previous security forces. These vehicles were ceremonial, ornate, bearing the royal insignia. Patricia looked up from her monitors, her face pale. Sir, we've just identified the new arrivals. That's a detachment from the Queen's Guard. Royal protection has been deployed to the embassy perimeter. Sarah Chen was already in the operations center, and she looked more worried than Marcus had ever seen her. This changes everything, she said quietly. The British government has escalated this to involve the royal household's security apparatus. This isn't just about law enforcement or intelligence anymore. They're making this a matter of national sovereignty and royal prerogative. Marcus understood immediately. The Queen's Guard wasn't just ceremonial. They were highly trained soldiers who took their protection duties with absolute seriousness. Their presence meant that the British government had decided to frame this situation in terms of protecting national security at the highest level. A new vehicle arrived, and from it emerged a man in formal attire who Marcus recognized from briefings as Sir Malcolm Hutchins, a senior official from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. He was accompanied by several other individuals, including what appeared to be senior police officials and military officers. The embassy's main phone line rang, and Sarah answered it herself. The conversation was brief and formal. When she hung up, she turned to Marcus. Sir Malcolm is requesting an immediate meeting. He's demanding it, actually. He says he has authorization from the Prime Minister's office to resolve this situation, and he expects our full cooperation. Marcus considered the situation carefully. Do we let him in? Sarah nodded slowly. We have to. Refusing to even meet would be seen as an unacceptable escalation. But Marcus, I want you and your team ready. I don't trust the way this is developing. Something feels wrong about the timing and the intensity of their response. Arrangements were made to receive Sir Malcolm and 2 members of his delegation in a formal conference room. Security protocols were carefully followed, with weapons and electronic devices collected before anyone entered the embassy proper. Marcus positioned additional Marine guards discreetly near the conference room, just in case. Sir Malcolm Hutchins was a man in his late 50s, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. He entered the embassy with polite courtesy, but also with an unmistakable air of displeasure. He was accompanied by a senior official from MI5 and a brigadier from military intelligence. Sarah greeted them formally, introducing Marcus as the embassy's senior security officer. They all took seats around the conference table, and for a moment, there was nothing but tense silence as each side assessed the other. Sir Malcolm spoke first. Deputy Chief Chen, Agent Webb, let me be direct because time is critical. The individual you have inside this embassy, the man calling himself Dmitry Volkov, is not who he claims to be. Or rather, he is exactly who he claims to be. But his presence here is part of a larger operation designed to damage both British and American interests. Marcus kept his expression neutral. That's quite a claim, Sir Malcolm. Can you explain what you mean? The MI5 official, who introduced herself as Director Patricia Ashworth, took over. Dmitry Volkov is indeed a former SVR officer. That part of his story is true. What he hasn't told you is that his defection is a carefully orchestrated operation. The SVR has been running what we call a provocation campaign, designed to create tensions between Britain and the United States over intelligence sharing and asylum procedures. She opened a briefing folder and slid several photographs across the table. These images were taken over the past 3 weeks. They show Volkov meeting with known SVR controllers in Berlin and Prague. He wasn't on the run from Russian intelligence. He was being prepared and positioned for exactly this moment. Sarah examined the photographs carefully. Even if we accept your assessment, that doesn't change the fact that Mr. Volkov has requested asylum on American territory. We have legal obligations to process that request. Sir Malcolm's expression hardened. And therein lies the trap. By accepting Volkov, by going through the formal asylum process, you'll be committing to protect someone who is deliberately acting as a wedge between our 2 nations. The Russians will ensure that information leaks about British opposition to his asylum, about how we wanted him for questioning regarding operations on our soil. They'll paint Britain as interfering with American sovereignty, while simultaneously painting America as harboring someone who compromised British security operations. The brigadier spoke for the first time. The intelligence that Volkov has provided, this material about operations called Cascade, it's a mixture of genuine and fabricated information designed specifically to be verifiable enough to seem credible while leading your analysts down false trails. 3 months from now, when the operations you think you've disrupted never materialize, you'll have wasted resources and attention while actual Russian operations proceed elsewhere. Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath him. If what the British were saying was true, then every decision made since Volkov arrived had been playing into a sophisticated intelligence operation. But how could they verify these claims? You understand that this is a difficult position for us, Marcus said carefully. You're asking us to reject an asylum seeker and potentially hand him over to you based on allegations that his defection is fake. But we have procedures, laws, and obligations. We can't simply ignore those because of suspicions. Director Ashworth leaned forward. We're not asking you to hand him over without due process. What we're asking is that you allow British intelligence to participate in the debriefing process. Let us ask our questions. Let us present our evidence directly. If Volkov is genuine, our questions won't compromise that. But if he's a plant as we believe, then skilled questioning will expose the inconsistencies. It was a reasonable request on the surface, but Marcus knew it was also a trap of a different sort. Allowing British intelligence into the debriefing would set a precedent and would also mean sharing whatever information emerged from Volkov with a foreign service, even an allied one. Sarah made a decision. I need to consult with Washington on this. Your proposal requires authorization beyond what I can grant, but I appreciate you bringing your concerns directly to us rather than simply continuing the standoff outside. Sir Malcolm stood, signaling that the meeting was concluding. Deputy Chief Chen, I want to be clear about something. Her Majesty's government values its relationship with the United States above almost all other considerations. But we cannot allow a Russian intelligence operation to successfully drive a wedge between our nations. If necessary, we will take measures to ensure that doesn't happen. I hope those measures won't be required, but I want there to be no misunderstanding about how seriously we view this situation. After the British delegation departed, Marcus and Sarah sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Sarah spoke. That sounded like a threat. That was absolutely a threat, Marcus agreed. The question is, what kind of measures they're prepared to take and whether they're bluffing. Sarah picked up the secure phone to contact Washington with this new development. Marcus returned to the operations center, his mind racing through scenarios. If the British were right and Volkov was a plant, then the entire situation was a Russian success regardless of how it ended. If they were wrong, then a genuine defector was being falsely accused as part of British efforts to avoid admitting they had lost an intelligence competition. Either way, the situation had just become significantly more complicated, and Marcus had a growing sense that events were moving toward a confrontation that would test the embassy's security in ways no one had anticipated. The afternoon brought no relief from the tension that had settled over the embassy like a heavy fog. Washington had responded to Sarah's briefing about the British claims with caution and skepticism. The State Department wanted more evidence before making any decision about allowing British participation in the Volkov debriefing, and the CIA was conducting its own verification efforts on the information Volkov had provided. Marcus had returned to questioning Volkov, this time with a different focus. He needed to probe for inconsistencies, to test whether the British assessment had merit. But Volkov remained consistent in his story, providing additional details about his SVR work that seemed to check out against what was known about Russian intelligence operations. Tell me about your family, Marcus asked, shifting tactics. You've made a decision that means you likely can never return to Russia. What about your parents, siblings, anyone close to you? For the first time, real emotion flickered across Volkov's face. My mother died 3 years ago, cancer. My father is retired military, living in St. Petersburg. We have not been close for many years. He never approved of my choice to join intelligence services rather than follow his path in the army. I have a younger sister, Marina, who works as a teacher in Moscow. She is married, has 2 children I have seen, perhaps 5 times in their lives. And you're willing to give all of that up? Marcus pressed. Never see your niece and nephew grow up? Never reconcile with your father? I am willing, Volkov said firmly. Because what my service was planning, what Cascade represents, it crosses lines that I cannot accept. I did not join the SVR to help plan operations that could kill diplomats and their families. I joined to serve my country, not to become an instrument of chaos and terror. The conviction in his voice seemed genuine, but Marcus had learned over his career that the best liars believed their own stories. He needed more, some way to definitively determine whether Volkov was authentic or an incredibly skilled provocateur. The afternoon dragged on with more questions, more verification of details, more attempts to find cracks in Volkov's story. But every effort seemed to confirm rather than contradict his account. Marcus was beginning to believe they might actually have a legitimate defector when his radio erupted with urgent traffic. Security alert. We have movement at the north perimeter. Multiple individuals approaching the fence line. They're not in uniform, but they're moving with coordination. Marcus ran back to the operations center to find controlled chaos. The monitors showed at least a dozen men approaching from different directions, moving through the barriers that the British authorities had established. They weren't in uniform, but they moved like professionals, and several appeared to be carrying weapons. Get me identification on these individuals immediately, Marcus ordered, and get me a direct line to whoever is commanding the British forces outside. Patricia worked her keyboard frantically. Sir, I can't identify them clearly from the cameras, but their approach pattern suggests hostile intent. They're not acting like additional security personnel. They're acting like an assault force. The situation spiraled faster than Marcus could process. The mysterious individuals reached the embassy's outer fence line and began attempting to breach it. Alarms blared throughout the building as motion sensors and pressure plates detected the incursion. Marine guards rushed to defensive positions, and embassy staff were directed to secure areas away from exterior walls. Marcus made a split-second decision. All personnel, weapons tight. No one fires unless fired upon, or I give explicit authorization. But I want every approach point covered and recorded. Whatever is happening, we document everything. On the monitors, he watched as the British security forces, which had been maintaining their perimeter for hours, suddenly moved to intercept the new arrivals. A confrontation was unfolding directly outside the embassy, and Marcus realized with growing alarm that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Gunfire erupted outside, not directed at the embassy, but between the mysterious attackers and the British security forces. The sharp crack of weapons fire was unmistakable even through the embassy's reinforced walls. Staff members screamed, and Marcus barked orders to maintain calm and stay away from windows. "Who the hell are these people?" Sarah demanded. "Arriving in the operations center? Are they attacking us or are they attacking the British?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "But this is exactly what Sir Malcolm warned about. Provocation, chaos, creating an incident that serves someone's agenda." The firefight outside lasted less than 2 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. When it ended, several of the mysterious attackers were on the ground, and the British forces had established a tight cordon. Emergency vehicles arrived with remarkable speed, suggesting they had been staged nearby in anticipation of exactly this kind of event. Marcus's phone rang. It was a direct call from Sir Malcolm Hutchins. "Agent Webb, I hope you observed what just occurred. Those individuals were SVR contractors attempting to either extract or eliminate Volkov. We're not yet certain which. But I trust this demonstrates the seriousness of the situation and the authenticity of our concerns." Marcus struggled to process the implications. "Are you telling me that Russian intelligence just conducted an armed operation in the middle of London?" "That is precisely what I'm telling you," Sir Malcolm replied grimly. "And it's precisely the kind of provocation that Volkov's presence at your embassy is designed to enable. The Russians wanted an incident, and now they have one. Within hours, this will be international news. The narrative will be that Russian assets had to conduct an operation on British soil because a valuable Russian citizen was being improperly held in the American embassy." "That's insane," Marcus said. "Any reasonable analysis will see through that narrative." "Reasonable analysis rarely prevails in the court of public opinion or international diplomacy," Sir Malcolm countered. "Agent Webb, I'm formally requesting immediate access to Dmitry Volkov. We have wounded officers and a crime scene that extends to your embassy's perimeter. We need to determine whether Volkov's intelligence is reliable or part of this provocation. Please don't make me escalate this request through channels that neither of us want to use." Marcus looked at Sarah, who had been listening to the conversation on speaker. She nodded slowly, recognizing that the situation had fundamentally changed. "Sir Malcolm, give us 30 minutes. We need to contact Washington and get authorization. But I believe we can arrange for a joint debriefing under specific protocols." After ending the call, Marcus felt the weight of the day pressing down on him. Every decision had led to this moment, and he still wasn't certain whether they were protecting a valuable defector or harboring a sophisticated intelligence plant. The only certainty was that the situation had spiraled well beyond anything he had prepared for. In the holding room, Volkov sat quietly, unaware of the violence that had just occurred outside. When Marcus entered with 2 Marine guards, Volkov looked up with concern. "What is happening? I heard alarms and I thought I heard weapons fire." "We had an incident outside the embassy," Marcus said carefully. "Mr. Volkov, I need you to be completely honest with me right now. Were you expecting any kind of extraction or rescue attempt?" Volkov's eyes widened in genuine surprise. "Extraction? No, you don't understand. The SVR doesn't extract defectors. They eliminate them as examples to others. If there was an attack, it was to kill me, not to rescue me. Please, you must believe me. My former colleagues would rather see me dead than in American custody. The fear in Volkov's voice seemed authentic, and Marcus found himself believing him. But belief wasn't enough when international incidents and diplomatic crises were unfolding in real time. Over the next hour, arrangements were made for a joint debriefing. British intelligence officers would be allowed into the embassy under strict protocols. They would have the opportunity to question Volkov, to present their evidence of his alleged false defection, and to evaluate his claims in real time. It was an unprecedented level of cooperation, driven by an unprecedented situation. When Director Ashworth and her team arrived, they brought with them extensive files on Volkov, on Russian intelligence operations, and on what they claimed was evidence of the provocation campaign. The joint debriefing began in a large conference room, with both American and British officers present. For 3 hours, they questioned Volkov relentlessly. Director Ashworth was particularly skilled, asking questions that seemed designed to trap someone operating under false pretenses. But Volkov's answers remained consistent, and more importantly, he provided information that even the British officials acknowledged was valuable and appeared genuine. "You mentioned a contact in the Russian embassy here in London," Director Ashworth said. "Someone you worked with on surveillance operations. Give me their name and tell me how you communicated with them." Volkov provided a name and described communication protocols that Director Ashworth quietly verified through secure communications with her team. Each answer seemed to reinforce his credibility rather than expose him as a fraud. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. During a routine question about his training at the SVR Academy, Volkov mentioned an instructor named Colonel Sokolov who had taught advanced tradecraft. He described specific training exercises and lessons that Sokolov had emphasized. One of the British intelligence officers who had been quietly observing suddenly spoke up. "Wait, Colonel Sokolov, mid-50s, walked with a limp from an old injury?" Volkov nodded. "Yes, exactly. From Afghanistan," he said. "Shrapnel in his left leg." The British officer looked troubled. "Colonel Sokolov was found dead 3 days ago in Berlin. Apparent suicide, but our German counterparts suspected foul play. He had been attempting to make contact with Western intelligence services." The room fell silent as the implications settled over everyone. If Sokolov had been eliminated for attempting to defect, it suggested that the SVR was actively hunting potential turncoats. It also suggested that Volkov's defection was genuine, not orchestrated. Director Ashworth leaned back in her chair, reassessing. "Mr. Volkov, the photographs we have of you meeting with SVR controllers in Berlin and Prague. You're saying those meetings were part of your official duties, not preparation for this operation?" "Of course," Volkov replied. "I met with many SVR officers as part of my work coordinating intelligence collection across Europe. If you have photographs of such meetings, they prove nothing except that I was doing the job I was assigned to do." It was Marcus who finally asked the critical question. "Director Ashworth, is it possible that your assessment of Volkov as a plant was itself based on Russian disinformation? That they wanted you to doubt his defection so that he wouldn't be taken seriously?" The British intelligence director considered this carefully before responding. "It's possible. In fact, given what we've learned in this session, I'm beginning to think it's probable. The Russians have run successful disinformation operations before, convincing us that genuine defectors were frauds and vice versa. If Volkov is real, and his intelligence is genuine, then discrediting him in advance would be a logical play." Sarah Chen, who had been observing the session, spoke up. "So where does that leave us? We have a potential defector who appears to be genuine, intelligence that seems valuable, and a situation that has already resulted in violence and will certainly create diplomatic complications. What's the path forward?" Sir Malcolm, who had joined the session midway through, provided an answer. "The path forward is that we accept that we've all been manipulated to some degree by a sophisticated Russian operation. The violence outside was designed to create chaos and confusion, to make us doubt each other and ourselves. But the facts are becoming clearer. Mr. E.C. Volkov appears to be a genuine defector with valuable intelligence. The question is how we move forward in a way that serves both British and American interests while denying the Russians the division they sought to create. Negotiations continued into the evening, but a framework emerged. Volkov would be granted asylum in the United States, but he would first cooperate fully with British intelligence on matters pertaining to operations in the United Kingdom. The intelligence he provided would be shared between services, and both nations would work together to verify and act on the information about Cascade and other Russian operations. It wasn't a perfect solution, and it required both sides to compromise on positions they had initially considered non-negotiable. But it was a solution that served the interests of both nations while recognizing the humanity of a man who had risked everything to do what he believed was right. 3 days later, Dmitry Volkov was quietly transferred from the American embassy to a secure debriefing facility outside London. The incident had made international news, but the full details were carefully managed to avoid providing the Russians with the propaganda victory they had sought. British and American officials issued a joint statement emphasizing the strong partnership between the two nations and their shared commitment to countering hostile intelligence operations. Marcus Webb stood in his office, looking out at the London skyline, reflecting on the most intense 72 hours of his career. He had made dozens of critical decisions, some of which could have gone terribly wrong, but somehow, through a combination of professionalism, caution, and a bit of luck, the situation had been resolved without the catastrophic breakdown in British-American relations that the Russians had clearly hoped to engineer. Sarah Chen stopped by his office with a message from Washington. The director sends his compliments on your handling of the situation. Apparently, the British have also sent positive communications about the professionalism of embassy security throughout the incident. Marcus nodded, accepting the compliment, but feeling the weight of how close things had come to disaster. We got lucky, Sarah. If Volkov had been a plant, if the British had been more aggressive, if those contractors outside had actually breached the perimeter, this could have ended very differently. But it didn't, Sarah replied. You made good decisions under extraordinary pressure, and you helped navigate a path through what could have been an international crisis. That's not luck, Marcus. That's why you're good at what you do. After she left, Marcus sat down at his desk and began drafting his official report on the incident. There would be reviews, debriefings, lessons learned, and probably some classified medals that could never be publicly acknowledged. But more than any of that, there would be the knowledge that when tested in ways he never anticipated, the systems and protocols and human judgment that protected American diplomatic personnel abroad had ultimately worked. In a secure facility outside London, Dmitry Volkov continued his debriefing, providing intelligence that would help disrupt Russian operations across Europe. He had traded his former life for an uncertain future, but he had also struck a blow against operations he believed crossed moral lines that no intelligence service should cross. The Royal Guard units that had surrounded the embassy during the crisis had returned to their regular duties, and the special security forces had dispersed. The street outside the American embassy looked normal again, with typical London traffic and pedestrians going about their business, unaware of the drama that had unfolded behind those walls. But in intelligence services in Moscow, there was frustration and anger. The operation designed to drive a wedge between Britain and America had not only failed, but had actually strengthened cooperation between the two services. The attempted attack on the embassy had been too obvious, too heavy-handed, and had ultimately exposed the very provocation it was meant to conceal. Marcus knew that the Russians would try again, perhaps with greater subtlety next time. The great game of intelligence and counterintelligence never truly ended. It just moved to new venues and took new forms. But for now, he had played his part in one small victory, in one successfully navigated crisis. As night fell over London, Marcus finally allowed himself to relax slightly. The embassy was secure, the crisis had passed, and tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities. But tonight, he could take a moment to appreciate that sometimes, even in the murky world of international intelligence and diplomatic security, it was possible to find a path through chaos that served justice, protected the innocent, and upheld the principles that made the work worthwhile. The story of an FBI agent and a Royal Guard standoff that briefly captured international attention would fade from headlines, replaced by new crises and new stories. But for those who lived through it, who made the decisions and faced the consequences, it would remain a defining moment, a test that revealed character and shaped futures in ways both obvious and subtle. Marcus Webb would continue his service, carrying the lessons of those intense days with him. He had learned that the most dangerous situations often arose not from clear enemies, but from the gray spaces where allegiances were uncertain and motives were hidden. He had learned that the strongest partnerships could be tested by sophisticated operations designed to exploit natural tensions and differences. Most importantly, he had learned that the true measure of diplomatic and security professionals was not whether they could avoid every crisis, but whether they could navigate through crisis when it arrived with wisdom, courage, and a commitment to principles larger than convenience or immediate advantage. The morning after everything was resolved, Marcus received a call from an unknown number. When he answered, the voice on the other end was Dmitry Volkov's. "Agent Webb, I wanted to thank you for believing me when you had many reasons not to, for protecting me when it would have been easier to simply hand me over. You saved my life, and you gave me a chance to do something meaningful with the knowledge I possess. I will not waste that chance." "Just tell the truth," Marcus replied. "That's all anyone can ask." "And Mr. Volkov? Good luck. You're going to need it." After hanging up, Marcus looked around his office, at the secure facilities and sophisticated technology that helped protect American interests abroad. But he knew that ultimately, security wasn't just about technology or protocols. It was about people making difficult decisions under pressure, about maintaining principles even when expedience beckoned, about building trust even when deception seemed safer. The incident that began with a desperate defector appearing at the embassy gates and escalated to armed confrontation and international tension had ultimately reinforced rather than damaged the foundations of cooperation and trust that made the Western alliance functional. It was a small victory in a much larger struggle, but small victories mattered, especially when the alternative was catastrophic failure. Marcus Webb returned to his daily duties, to the routine challenges of embassy security, and the constant vigilance required to protect American personnel in a complex and often hostile world. But he did so with renewed appreciation for the importance of his work and for the web of relationships, protocols, and principles that made it possible. The standoff was over, but the work continued, as it always would. In embassies around the world, security professionals faced their own challenges and made their own critical decisions. Some would become international incidents, but most would be resolved quietly, professional victories that never made headlines but that collectively maintained the fragile order that allowed diplomacy to function. And somewhere in a secure facility, Dmitry Volkov continued telling his story, providing intelligence that would save lives and disrupt operations, justifying the risks taken and the tensions endured during those tense days when an FBI agent and royal guards faced each other across the diplomatic divide, when decisions made in moments would echo for years, and when the simple act of offering shelter to someone seeking protection became a test of principles and partnership that defined more than just one man's fate.